Good morning and welcome to Norwood. I think I'm actually supposed to wait until the candidate is in the room to say this.
I think you could just open.
Yes.
That's why we're here.
Why
and
we're
then
here.
Bring her in.
Great. Sorry, I was given a script and that is most certainly not on the script. Good morning and welcome to the superintendent candidate interviews Saturday, February 2nd, Groundhog Day. Our first is it the 3rd? Oh my good God.
It's been a week.
It's been a week. February 3rd, Saturday, February 3rd. We are coming to you today from the Savage Center room. Our first candidate this morning is Dr. Prita Tahiliani. Welcome. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Norwood. I'd like to open the interview by asking that the school committee members please introduce yourselves so we can start down at this end.
Hi again. Teresa Stewart. Hi, Kate Sibington.
Hello again, Joan Giblin.
David Heltz.
And Anne Marie Mazzola. Welcome. Our format this evening this morning, script, consists of 3 parts. We invite you to make a brief opening statement. After that, we have a series of prepared questions that we will ask, and we will close by listening to any final comments that you wish to make. A copy of the questions have been placed in front of you, and we have scheduled 1 hour for the interview. We each have had an opportunity to review your application materials, and we would appreciate it if you could take 2 or 3 minutes to further introduce yourself to us.
Thank you so much. First, I just want to thank you all for having me here today and for inviting me into your district this past week. It's been really wonderful to be able to visit your schools, interact with some of your educators and your students and school leaders and some of you. So thank you so much for your time and consideration. My name is Priya. I actually was born in Memphis, Tennessee, to Indian immigrants. That's where I actually grew up. And 50% of English learners in our country are actually American born, and I was one of those. So I did not learn English until I went to school. This obviously caused some difficulties for me, and after I wasn't making progress in first grade, they wanted to hold me back. My parents pled with them to please we'll only speak English to her at home. And we know now that that's not best language instruction, but again, my parents were doing whatever they could do. So then I was in a situation where I didn't understand what was going on at school, and I also didn't understand what was going on at home. And I think that really kind of, impacted sort of the rest of my education and my learning journey. But what made me successful was the fact that I had teachers who really took extra time to work with me. There wasn't ESL back then, and so they did what teachers have been doing forever, which is they spent extra time, they figured it out, they found resources, they did research, and it wasn't just the teachers in my early elementary grades. Language learning is a lifetime process, so it was all through school. And so just out of, understanding and building that appreciation and respect for what these educators were doing for me, I wanted to do the same for others. So I came to Boston to go to college for education. I majored in education, also in English. I did get a minor in business administration. And I started working in the Boston public schools. I taught there for 15 years, 8 years in the middle school system and 7 years at the high school level. And then I was in school and district administration for 4 years before going to the Everett Public Schools to be the superintendent. And education is just my passion. I love this work. I know it's a hard time to do this work, and so everybody here and everybody who continues to be in schools is incredibly committed, and I do share that same commitment and joy for this work.
Thanks, Priya. I have the first question, and you covered most of it. It was why you went in, why did you go into education? The second part of the question is, why do you want to be the next superintendent here in Norwood?
So I have been watching a lot of your meetings recently, and I do want to commend you on how meticulous, organized, and transparent they are. But what I have noticed from observing, not just from afar, but also as I walked around this week, is that there's an incredible priority and focus on education here. The meetings are very centered on what's best for students, whether it's curriculum and social emotional learning or these, new amazing facilities that you all have worked so hard to advocate for. And I think that one of the things I've also noticed and actually heard is that Norwood is a place that's always trying to do better. And I've definitely witnessed that, and I think that I share that same commitment. I'm also always trying to do better and be better, and I would love to be in a place that shares that same commitment and vision. I also really appreciate the fact that I was watching a recent meeting where you had some folks from the town side come in. I'm not exactly sure what had precipitated that, but they came in order to, transparently deliver a message and make sure that it had been delivered here too. And I just really liked seeing that working towards, greater collaboration, greater communication and transparency, because I do think that that's a large part of our work too, is not just in the school system, but obviously with the town as well.
So Prita, this position will require a high level of communication with all stakeholders and around initiatives that are new and in some cases will be perceived as challenging to certain members of our community. Can you please describe your experience both with overall communication strategies and in particular with change management?
Absolutely. So I started in the Everett Public Schools on March 1st of 2020. So I closed schools on my 9th day. And so I do have a little bit of experience with dealing with change and communication in a challenging environment. And so that, pretty much exemplified my entire time in the Everett Public Schools. But I think it also presented an opportunity for me to become a better communicator, for me to learn communication strategies that maybe weren't the typical ones that I had used prior in education or that any of us had used prior in education. And so I think it was a time of great change. And also, again, it gave me an opportunity I was going to be doing a listening and learning tour anyway. It gave me an opportunity to do it in a slightly different way, but one of the things that we did as we were trying to navigate coming back from COVID is we created a steering committee. And again, I'm new to this community, so I'm at a very large disadvantage, and so it behooved me to get every stakeholder at that table on the steering committee. So we had faith-based leaders, community-based organizations, of course, educators at all levels, custodians. We had city elected officials, we had community-based organizations, parents, and students on this steering committee, and then we had 5 different subcommittees that were part of that focused on different areas, also made up of multiple stakeholders, but focused on, for example, professional learning, which was going to look different coming back. Safety and facilities, which was looking different. We also had, of course, the Department of Health on that steering committee as well, and they were a critical part of that. So I think that really built a foundation for the work that I did in Everett after that, because I found that bringing in all the stakeholders and communicating with everybody actually really made the transition back to coming back to school, both hybrid and then full-time, which was very challenging for everybody, but I feel like we worked really well together to achieve that goal. And so yes, constant change. We did remote, we did hybrid, we did back to school, and it was nice to be there in the last few years when we were a little bit more back to normal. But I think that, again, that sort of strategy remained part of my overall leadership style, just because I felt like it did make it so that people not just felt heard, they actually were heard. Their, input was taken into account, and they could see that as part of our final plan.
Thank you. How are you going to ensure the safety and well-being of all of our students and all of our staff in the district?
So this is something that we have been prioritizing a lot in Everett. Unfortunately, we did so as a result of an incident that did occur where we had to go into a lockdown, and I think this was after COVID, so we had kind of taken our eye off of, those kinds of procedures while we were remote and hybrid. And so again, it presented an opportunity for us to do a lot of work. We identified a lot of areas where there were gaps, not just in our policies and our procedures, but in our physical structures. So we, in response to, not just what occurred, but also, an outpouring of educators and parents who had felt unsafe in that moment in time. And that is the most important thing, that we wanted to make sure we were letting people know that we were prioritizing this work. So we created a plan that we presented on an ongoing basis. We started with, okay, this is what we immediately have done already, fixed. This is what we are doing now, and this is what we are working towards in the future. And then we would revisit that, at school committee meetings and newsletters and literally checking off boxes of here's what we've done, here's where we are. And it took some time, but I think after about a year and a half, we were in a completely different place. And it's been really nice to actually go to a lot of the superintendent conferences and things, and they're talking about safety and procedures and things that we had sort of already done. So we've, become sort of a model for the state. We've done some of the nitty-gritty, not so fun things like the bulletproof glass and, the cameras at every door and things like that, but we've also created a whole personnel team. We outsourced with a security team. We have a director of security. And we really are working on making sure that we are training everyone in the building in an ongoing way, that students are also being part of this conversation so that everybody can feel safe. And there's also the other part of that too, which is the social emotional wellness and safety of our students, because that is just as critical. And so once your buildings are safe and secure, to also make sure that we are creating environments that are inclusive, that promote belonging. And I know you guys have done a lot of work around that already. And I think it's really great work that you guys have done that I would be more than honored to be able to move forward.
Thank you. I have the next question. How would you define the success for your superintendency 3 years from now if offered the position?
I would define it by how much a part of the community I've become. I think it's really important to immerse myself in the community, to learn, to meet everyone, to engage everyone, and really understand, what are some of the challenges that we faced in the past, and so that we have a clear path forward. So I think that would certainly be one thing. Also, I know that you all are finishing a strategic plan, and that it's time to kind of move to your next strategic planning process. And you all have a really great system already where you have a dashboard, and so it's very transparent where you guys are in each of your initiatives. And so, there are some things that it looks like can kind of be, graduated, and then other things where maybe that needs to be revisited but also enhanced. And so I think that I would measure my success based on, have we continued a transparent process of saying where we want to go and how we're going to get there and who's responsible and what the timeline is, because I think that's really important, but also how have we achieved that? How have we created measurable goals that we have achieved over time? I think that also is what I would look at to determine my own success.
I have the next question. It's a little more lengthy. The roles and responsibilities of school committees and superintendents are sometimes clear and sometimes ambiguous. For example, budget approval versus budget implementation, personnel policy and finance versus personnel administration, or even dealing with parents and teachers with concerns or complaints. Can you describe some situations where these roles and responsibilities have challenged you and how you would work to address them if you were our superintendent?
Absolutely. So, I think this is a challenge for all school committees and superintendents, and I think what everyone has in common is that we are all working towards the same goal, and we want what's best for our students and our families and our educators. And so I have definitely, this is sort of a fluid process as you get to know your school committee members, and I think it would be really important for me to understand what everybody's priorities are, what everyone's work style is. I think that communication is key, and that's something I learned and know that I could have done better in my previous district, and I aim to do that in my current district. I was always accessible, but I would love to be able to, invite the opportunity to meet more regularly, to hear from you all more regularly. You will certainly hear from me. And also just figure out as we kind of go what's working and what's not, because there is a lot of gray area, and I think that coming into it as we all want the same things, it's just about how to get there, and I feel like if we work as partners to do that, and sometimes some of those gray areas, it's okay if they remain gray, and if we work as partners to sort of solve something. And other times, it is my job, and I'm happy to do it, and so that you all can do your jobs, and that is my responsibility. So I'm happy to do it either way, but I know that we all have our different priorities and our passions in this work, and for something that somebody is particularly interested in or passionate about or wants to be involved in, I would never say, no, you can't be involved, or I would actually invite the opportunity to be a thought partner, to be a support system too for me. And also, again, you all are the community members. You're the ones who have known these families and students and educators for a really long time. So to not tap into your expertise and your understanding of the context here, would be unfortunate. So I think that yes, those roles can be ambiguous, but I think that if we just work together as partners to determine how are we going to move forward and what is our ultimate goal, that it can be much simpler than sometimes it seems.
Thank you. Priya, I have the next question. When you prepare your budget for the school committee, how do you go about this, and what happens before the proposal reaches the school committee? Also, what happens if the school committee has recommendations that are different from your proposal?
Absolutely. So we go through, like a multi-tiered process, a multi-step process that starts very early in the school year regarding our budget. So we start by providing the budgets to our school leaders, their current budgets to school leaders, department heads, and they have the opportunity to kind of look over their budget, see what are the things that they would like to continue, see what are things that maybe they no longer need, and then also what are some of their proposals for things that they need in the future, whether it's personnel or other non-personnel items. Then we have a series of meetings with those groups. During those meetings, we have multiple stakeholders there. So if it's a meeting specifically about a school, we will have the EL director there. We will have student services there, so that we can all go through the budget and determine, what are the initiatives that we can fund. Also, when they are inputting into that template, so similar to your strategic plan with your 5.1, and so we have drop downs where if you are asking or for proposing a new investment, how does it align to the overall strategic plan? So you do have to identify that, provide a rationale for how it aligns, so that again, we're all working towards the same thing. So then we have those meetings. It's an interactive dialogue. I do always invite school committee members to those meetings if they would like to attend and just provide input or even just observe. And we even in the last year have started to bring in students. So we actually had a meeting with students around the budget, which was really great. And I know you all meet with your student advisory council really often, which is wonderful. And so because of that, we increased the amount of funds we're providing for field trips, for example, based on feedback that they gave us. And so really, again, talking to all stakeholders. Then when we go to the school committee, many of them are already familiar with what we've been talking about because we have been inviting them into the conversation throughout. But we do try to provide options from the start. So when we are proposing the budget, there are areas where we may even say, okay, here are two options, here are things that we are thinking about, and we'd love to hear your input. And sometimes the recommendations are very different from that, and we spend our money very differently. But sometimes, we choose one of those initiatives. Again, our goal is not to dictate the process, or my goal isn't to dictate the process, it's to take the work off of the school committee. So by providing options, I'm just trying to take away some of the work. But if there are other priorities and initiatives that you've identified, hopefully you've already emailed me, let me know, we've talked about it, and we included it as part of our conversations up until, but if it's not something that came up until, the 11th hour, which was how safety and security happened with our process, we still take it into account and make sure that we're funding it appropriately.
Thank you. Excuse me. I have the next question. So one of the things that a school does is academic outcomes and academic achievement. So how would you work to achieve high academic outcomes and increase test scores, as that is the barometer in the state?
Right. Well, I know that you already have done a tremendous amount of work on this, and I think it would be important to continue that work. I know that you had the override in order to, be able to invest in curriculum and assessment systems, and that you do have interim assessments now that you've been looking at. And I read your comprehensive report from DESE, and the recommendations were to just now build in systems for looking at that data. So you already have interventionists, but how are you creating structures and systems to look at that data, not just at the school level, but across the schools, at a district level? How is the leadership being part of that process? So I think that is a very important part of this. I know that you also have a curriculum review process that you have begun, and that one of the recommendations is to create a manual that, again, just kind of solidifies what that process is going to look like in the future, what the timeline is. And I think a lot of those recommendations were actually just very sound and thoughtful, and I would use those certainly to guide the work, especially if that's what I'm hearing during my listening and learning tour, that there's nothing that's contradictory to that is the direction that everybody needs to move in. I know that culturally responsive practices and curriculum is also an important part of the work that you all are doing, and that you just had an equity audit. And so I think that, again, working towards all of those recommendations, but then keeping a very close eye on the data and what it's looking like. And I think the most important step is building in those structures to look at data at a very systematic way from the district level to the school level. And that work is also being done a lot by central offices to take that work off of the school leaders who have so much going on, but that we're building in systems for them to do it in a way that's more efficient, and that where they can, get ahead more. I also know that you guys are interested in using DataWise, which is actually what I used when I was in I was the assessment and accountability coordinator at my high school, and I led teachers through DataWise cycles. So it doesn't have to be DataWise, but I definitely have a commitment to looking at data and determining how it is that we're going to implement interventions, and determining if we are being successful or not. I also do want to be very cognizant of the fact that, academic outcomes do have as much to do with social emotional wellness and well-being, so those are things that also need to be focused on, especially after COVID. I know you all do the YRBS and some of these other youth surveys, and that maybe building them in more consistently every year, especially post-COVID, might be a good way to make sure that, we're on the right track. But I think that those factors need to be brought in as data points too when we're looking at academic outcomes.
I have the next one. Can you give some examples of how, in your previous roles, you have worked with staff, parents, students, and municipal partners to build support for the schools?
Yes, so we worked together quite frequently on a number of different initiatives. So to start, for example, was the COVID reentry. That was a time when we really worked well together. But then we also actually created a very similar system of stakeholder input when we were addressing security as well. And that did need to be a multi-layered approach that included everybody. We needed municipal support. We built in a lot of structures that we hadn't previously had. We wanted to hear from parents how they, perceived security and safety in our buildings. So that was definitely a place where we worked together quite frequently. Another area is certainly the budget. We try to get as much feedback as possible. Sometimes we would do town halls to invite people in to talk about what are their priorities. Other times we'd put out surveys because in multiple languages to really see what are the priorities. And again, we want to get input, but we also want to save parents and families time. We know that their time is, very valuable too. So we try to provide multiple access points for people to give input. And then also for staff in particular, I think it's very important to make sure that staff are empowered and have the time and the spaces built in to provide feedback, to be part of the solution building process. Common planning time is a really important thing, and unfortunately, it's really difficult in our schedules these days. So how do we apply for grants and get funding in order to support stipending teachers for common planning time or other, or other times after school where they can provide their input? Because again, we want to value their time as well. We actually even got to a grant. We applied for a parent engagement grant where we were actually able to to compensate parents as well for providing input. So that was really exciting as well, because again, parents have so many different things on their plate. So as much as we can get input, that is definitely the first step to make sure you're inviting it and providing multiple access points. And the second ideal step is to be able to compensate people for their time and for the valuable input that they are providing.
Okay. So what have you done in your experience to try to make your special education department work better? How have you looked at ways to contain costs, and how have you balanced the needs of students with the fiscal responsibility of the school department?
Absolutely. So I certainly worked very closely with our SPED PAC. They were an incredible resource. I was very lucky to have an amazing special education director who had been in the system a long time, knew the families and the students, and had a very good perspective on the approach that the district needed to take. So in that case, every system is different. So once I saw that there was a system that was working well, then my goal was to support it, was to better support him with parents that were seeking extra support for their students that required IEPs, for challenging conversations that needed to happen, for school leaders that needed additional support. So that was my role. But I think that, again, depending on the context, you have to determine the context first. You don't want to, fix what's not broken, and there it wasn't broken. We actually had a comprehensive review where we received no recommendations for our special education department, which is absolutely unheard of. So I was in a situation where, things were working really well. But as far as fiscal responsibility, I think, one of the things that we were always keeping our eye on is our out-of-district placements. The district had already made the wonderful move of creating a program within the school system where it was a day program. So students actually came from other cities as well to support. There was a program for our emotionally impaired students. And so we had a full school that was dedicated to that. And in that way, we're able to bring a lot of students back into the district. And so just being able to support that process moving forward, because we were in a rented building. So it took a lot of work and time and effort in order to determine if that program was going to be able to stay and if we were going to be able to have a permanent space. And I can now say that we do have a permanent space. The building is being bought. Again, we worked with the municipality in order to do that, and that those students will continue to have a home in the district. But one of the things we were looking at there is what is the cost of buying the building versus sending our students out. There's the tangible fiscal cost, but then there's also the intangible cost of, sending our students out of the district when we had the ability to have them serviced right there in the district. That isn't always the case. Very lucky to have schools around the state that provide very different specialized services, and we were happy to provide one of those spaces, but obviously there are situations where we need to be able to utilize those spaces and leverage the resources that other communities have as well. So I think keeping an eye on that is really important too.
So I have the next question, and this question is really about your direct reports at the central admin level. So how do you build and maintain an administrative team? Have you promoted professional growth among your administrators? And again, that's the central admin team.
So I know my strengths, and I know the areas where I, need extra support. And so I always try to build a team where they are complementing, my own strengths, and fulfilling those needs. I also do try to encourage healthy dialogue. I don't want people to just agree with me. In fact, I appreciate when people are pushing back, providing other ideas. It is not personal, it is all professional. We are working towards the same goal. And I think that can be kind of uncomfortable at first, but my management for others, because they're unsure, how are you going to take this? But I think over time, in my administrative team, people realize that no, I actually do want to hear it, and we may actually debate or argue back and forth about if this is the best idea. Many of those arguments were about our return from COVID. So, we were all in different situations, and it was important to hear those perspectives, though, in order to make an informed decision moving forward. But also to even, if we're making a decision that was contrary to someone's experience, to know how we were justifying or explaining that as well. So I think it's an important part of the process of learning to communicate the decisions you're making as well. So I definitely want to build a team or build a culture in a team where that healthy dialogue is going to happen. I also very much believe in professional growth at the administrative level, but also at the teacher level, the paraprofessional level. I am very passionate about pipeline programs throughout our schools. We actually had an education pathway. I know you have some innovation pathways as well, which is really exciting. We had an education pathway where we actually had students who went back to their K-8 sometimes and interned there, that we did a teacher signing party at the end of the school year. And we actually had students who, directly after graduation, we had 4 students who became paras in our district as they were attending school. And that was part of a pipeline program that we had created. So that also went up to paraprofessionals who were getting subsidized bachelor's degrees and getting their teacher certification. We had MTEL prep programs. Then that went to coordinators or teachers who wanted to have a PALS preparation program. So we created a PALS cohort for our educators or our teachers who were interested in looking at administration, and then same for administration on up. So we were always applying for grants and trying to find places where we could support the professional growth of everyone. I think that is a way to show that you value your staff. That's also a way to keep people in a time where, people can get a job anywhere, and so you really want to demonstrate that you value your staff, that you are investing in them, that you are empowering them. And I think that builds a greater morale in your staff overall and builds a better culture. Plus, we're an education institution, right? So building that culture of learning throughout and constantly encouraging people to get more degrees or certifications or wherever their passion lies, that I think is also a really important piece of ensuring that you are managing and supporting your human resources.
So Priya, what implementation strategies have you used to ensure district strategic plans and policies are carried out on all levels?
Yes, so we had a strategic plan and a strategy for district improvement, and the way we created it actually evolved over time, so that we were getting more input from educators. So first we modeled sort of the process that we wanted to get input from district leaders, from central office staff, from principals and vice principals. But once we had sort of modeled that, we wanted our educator or our school leaders to bring that down to their teaching staff as well, to focus on their ILTs and kind of build in that same process that when they were coming forward for their district strategic planning, that they had the input of the staff and that they had gotten that staff voice, that they had even tapped into their parent voice and their student voice as well. So I think that it's really important when you're creating a district strategic plan that when it is presented to everybody, it looks familiar. That everybody feels like, oh, that is something that I thought was important, or that was something that I said. So then when we created the district strategic plan, we actually, even the collaboration process that we took on with our department leaders and our school leaders looked very different the last year than it did my first year, and it was a much more collaborative process. And then it would kind of go work its way back down again. So then we would create a strategic plan for the district that hopefully had all of that input in, but then that also not only impacted the school improvement plans, which we wanted to be certainly tailored to their particular schools, but also aligned to the district strategic plan, and then same thing for the budget. So I think alignment overall is really important, but I think that building the alignment vertically both ways is really an important part of this district strategic plan, because if you want to make sure it's carried out on all levels, then you need all levels to be part of the creation of it.
Thank you. So that is all of our questions that we have in front of you, but we do have time for some follow-up questions. So I don't know if anyone on the committee had any follow-ups for Dr. Tahiliani. I'm sorry.
It's actually not doctor yet. It's
It's
miss.
not?
But I'm doing my oral defense this month. So
Look at me. Look at me. Look at me giving you. I apologize.
Oh, no.
I had two, but my first one I'll ask and then kick to the rest of the committee. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those pathways? I've known a couple of districts to do things like this, and I think that's a really, really great way, one, to sort of help combat hiring issues, trying to get people in. So I know you had talked about, maybe paras to, helping with bachelor's degrees, but just talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So it was certainly a work in progress. It took a long time. We worked with universities really closely. So we just started calling universities, asking for meetings, figuring out what resources they had to provide, and then convincing them to help us. The more you knock on somebody's door and say, no, this is really going to be good for you, the better. And we have a lot of colleges and community colleges and universities around us, many of which already have education pathways, so and guidance counselor pathways, so it's important to tap into those. So for example, the most recent one that we convinced was the BU Consortium of Education to take us on, specifically for their guidance counselor program, so that we could actually provide very subsidized courses to anybody who is interested in getting a guidance counselor license. And also, as part of that program, they actually had an equity certificate that you could earn as well. So depending on what your interest was, or just trauma-informed learning. So we would just work really closely with the universities in order to get these opportunities, and by the end we actually had an entire portfolio of opportunities that different educators could tap into, so that those students, for example, who were paraprofessionals in our district, were also subsidized in the colleges that they were going to in order to earn their degrees. And I was actually very excited when we would have, we had paraprofessionals who graduated with their bachelor's degrees, and were then looking into their teacher certification. But again, that was all as a partnership with SNHU, who provided a lot of funding. So we had a lot of we had Bunker Hill Community College, we did stuff with Emerson. So we had a huge menu, and it really just came about as the result of a lot of calls, a lot of meetings. We called BU for like 3 years, and it was only the third year. And yet I'm an alumni, and I was like, "What are we doing?" So it was only the third year that we finally got them on board. But I feel like the more you tap into those resources that are around us and say, "Hey, I'm here, and we're interested, and we're going to make this a good experience for you too. We're going to make it a feather in your cap too, for how you are supporting the local communities and how you're building your programming in a really authentic way." That eventually, you got on their list and were part of their program. And that a lot of these universities themselves, so you can apply for the grants, which we all absolutely did, but a lot of the universities themselves have the ability to provide scholarships that are specifically at your school. We did have one university who actually, they came into our schools and led the classes there, so that our teachers didn't have to travel. Yeah, so anything we could do in order to provide those opportunities.
Joe?
I wanted to follow up on the question about safety and well-being of students and staff. So as you heard in the community forum, there is significant concern specifically at, I hear the most concern about the Willett and the middle school. And so I'm going to just ask kind of a pointed question. It's almost a follow-up to the community forum to give you kind of a broader opportunity to answer that. What is your approach if you have students who are dysregulated and then they're in a general classroom, there are legal restrictions around things, but they're worried parents? How do you go about addressing that when parents on both ends are understandably concerned about their child's safety?
Absolutely. So after that meeting, it was great to hear that concern. I actually went back and did a little research. Again, it's different when you're looking at it from afar, so I think it'd be really important to get into those schools as well. But as part of your comprehensive review, it did talk about behavior, building in positive behavior systems, so maybe PBIS or restorative justice, to have a more centralized or consistent approach to behavior and discipline across the district as well. It seemed like there were varied approaches. And so it seems like there's, to me, what I sensed was just a lot of uncertainty about like, how should this be handled? Maybe we're handling it differently. So really getting into the school, and I think I would start at the Willett, to sort of see what was happening myself. I think that's really important, to talk to educators, to talk to families, and to see what it is, and the school leaders, of course, to determine what is it that's really not working and how can we support this system better. I think it would be important to be really open with the parents at that school, invite them in, have them talk about their experiences and some of the solutions that they would suggest, whether it's in small groups or individually. And then I think all of that would be needed in order to make a plan that would need to be multifaceted. So it would probably include a training of some sort, but I think it would also include, articulating policies more clearly and laws more clearly. I think it may be also that we need to have more frequent teacher parent meetings, or there are things that, or school leader meetings with parents, and so I think there are a lot of different ways that you can approach it. It really depends though on the situation, and I think that what I certainly heard too is that there was a concern that there, not to say a lack of follow through, but that there was nothing done. And I think whenever that's the case, we need to look at and be like, well, what are we doing? Maybe we can't do exactly what this parent is asking for, right, because of the law, but there are certainly things that we can do. And how are we demonstrating to our parents that, yes, we are being responsive, we are taking their concerns into account, and we are making sure that their students are safe in class. Maybe it is about more creative scheduling to provide greater support or more personnel in that classroom at that time. There are different things we can do, but I think it's important to work with the parents and make sure they know that this is a problem that we are working to solve and that we are being partners with them to solve it. And then we're keeping real track of if it is demonstrating improvement or not. And if we're not demonstrating improvement, what are we going to do next? And that was kind of the plan that we created. Our issue with safety, but it's like here's what we're doing right now, here's what we've already done, here's what we're doing right now, and here's what we plan to do, and here's our end goal. And so I think if we, continue to communicate that plan and create that plan, co-create that plan with families, with school leaders, with teachers, and then we follow that plan, I think that, everybody feels that they are being heard and understood and that their input is actually being taken into account.
So Priya, I really appreciate it throughout our time with you today and at the forums. You've really woven in a lot of things that we have started as a district. You've expressed awareness of our strategic plan, of our DESE comprehensive report, of our equity audit. So you've done a lot of reading on Norwood. So with all those things, there are a lot of successes and still some challenges. What would you say at this time in your understanding of our district are you most excited to jump into and help us take to the next?
So, I was a teacher for 15 years, so that's always going to be really close to my heart. I know you guys are entering negotiations, so that might seem like a very volatile, scary time to enter into. But again, I think it kind of presents an opportunity for me to be most connected with that passion of being a teacher. I think teacher empowerment and teacher voice, providing those spaces is really important. And I think that also, again, builds morale at a time when, teacher morale around the state has suffered, and people are tired, people are challenged, people, and it's for a multitude of reasons. And so how are we working with our educators in order to better support them? How are we valuing them? How are we hearing them? And building in their input into everything that we do, and not just ceremoniously. Again, it's not about just having the meeting, it's about demonstrating that you are following up, that you're being responsive, and that what you are hearing is actually woven into the final plan. I think that is incredibly important. So I think that is where I would start, is with, getting to know the teachers and meeting with the teachers union and starting to build those relationships.
Any other follow-ups? No, that's not. All right. So in that case, would you please take the next few minutes to make closing statements, and if you wish, you can ask us some questions.
Okay, sounds good. Am I allowed to hand out materials? All right. So, I'll give you all of these. Oh, thank you so much.
Jim would have vociferously said no if we were not allowed. Thank you.
Already answered my question.
Yes, so this is more an entry framework than it is a plan. You would get a plan, obviously, that says all the stakeholders I'm going to speak with and things like that.
Can I share with them?
Yes, please. And so I just created this again to highlight some of my experience, but also you have your strategic plan so clearly, transparently articulated that I also wanted to demonstrate in there. I have aligned some of my own accomplishments with your strategic plan to demonstrate how I have competency in those areas and how I can support the growth in those initiatives moving forward. Also, there are some testimonials in there from parents there, and actually, as you were asking questions, I was thinking about them. There was one from a teacher who graduated from a program. I went to her graduation, and it was really exciting as part of one of our pathway programs through Regis. And so I just wanted to provide that as a little extra insight into my work and how it would complement your work. And it certainly was a result of reading all of those things along with your override report, which I would need to read again because that was a lot to take in. But it was very interesting to read, and I just have to say that I'm very impressed with the amount of work that has already been done here, how committed everybody is, how you've worked with the town in order to achieve some things that have been pretty, these haven't been small things that you've achieved over the last few years, and I think what I see from that is just an incredible amount of commitment and passion that I too share in this work. And so I would love to be a part of that team and to be able to join you in the work that you're doing so well.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Yep, yes, so we'll take, okay. David moves to take a recess. Seconded by Joan, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. So it's a short 10-minute recess.